The morning frost had barely begun to melt from the pine needles when a soft knock echoed through the side entrance of the Red Fern Wildlife Sanctuary. Inside, the scent of cedar planks mingled with antiseptic as Dr. Elena Moore glanced up from her clipboard. Before we dive into the story, please leave a comment below to let me know where in the world you're watching from today. She had just finished updating Ashcroft's recovery chart. The Bobcat was doing better than expected, strong, alert, almost ready. "Dr. Moore," called Henry Baird from the hall, his voice low but urgent. "You need to see this." Elena set down her pen and followed him through the narrow corridor toward the intake room. She was expecting a raptor, maybe another injured fox. Instead, what greeted her was a girl, no older than 15, wrapped in a puffy red coat dusted with snow. Her eyes were red-rimmed. In her trembling arms, nestled against a faded scarf, was something impossibly small. A kitten. Barely a handful of white fluff. "He was under our porch," the girl said, breath fogging in the cold air. "Crying all morning. No mother. He can't stand. Please, don't let him die." Elena stepped forward and gently lifted the kitten. The creature was limp, its breathing shallow. Frost had crusted in the fur along its tiny paws. One eye was sealed shut, the other milky with infection. The heartbeat beneath her fingers fluttered like a broken wing. "What's your name?" she asked, already turning toward the treatment wing. "Maya." "Okay, Maya, let's see if we can help your little friend." The sanctuary was built to heal eagles, deer, bears, wild things, not house cats. But Elena couldn't say no. She wasn't that kind of vet. By noon, the kitten, now named Nimbus by Maya, was stabilized on a heating pad, hooked to a tiny IV line. The sanctuary team would call a domestic rescue once he was strong enough for transfer. But none of them could have predicted what would happen next. Elena returned to the predator wing that afternoon, clipboard in hand, checking on Ashcroft. The Bobcat's golden eyes followed her movements from the back of his enclosure. Strong, silent, controlled. He had never shown signs of taming, no interest in humans, no comfort in their presence. That was good. Wild meant ready. Just as she made her final note, she heard Kayla's voice from the hallway. "Dr. Moore, something's wrong." She turned and saw Kayla, the new intern, holding Nimbus's incubator. "He started crying during feeding. I was taking him somewhere quieter. I passed Ashcroft's enclosure and—" She trailed off. Ashcroft was no longer at the back of his enclosure. He stood at the front, pressed against the mesh, eyes fixed on the incubator. He let out a sound none of them had ever heard from him. A deep, chuffing purr. Elena stepped closer, cautious. Ashcroft didn't growl. He didn't bare his teeth. Instead, he lowered his body and blinked slowly, relaxed, almost tender. Every time Kayla edged the incubator away, Ashcroft grew agitated. When she brought it closer, he settled. "This doesn't make sense," Elena muttered. "He's never reacted to any other animal like this, especially not a domestic kitten." "It's not predatory," Henry observed. "Look at his posture." "It's almost maternal," Kayla said. "No," Elena snapped. "He's a solitary male bobcat. This is instinct confusion at best. Keep the kitten in the treatment wing. Ashcroft is days from release. We can't afford disruptions." But that night, as the staff rotated through overnight checks, a quiet truth began to emerge. Nimbus's breathing grew ragged around midnight. His tiny chest heaved with each breath. The antibiotics weren't helping. Kayla sat beside the incubator, blinking back tears. "He's not going to make it," she whispered to Melissa, who had come in for the late shift. Melissa frowned. "He was stronger this afternoon. What changed?" "He's been alone," Kayla said. I think he needs him, the Bobcat. It sounded absurd, unscientific, but something about it rang true. Melissa hesitated, then made a call. Elena answered groggily. You're suggesting we what? Place Nimbus's incubator near Ashcroft. Not inside, just outside the enclosure. Supervised. Safe. That's not protocol. Neither is losing a life we might save. Silence. Do it, Elena said finally. 1 hour. Then call me. The incubator was wheeled quietly into the predator wing and placed outside Ashcroft's mesh fence. The Bobcat rose the instant Nimbus was within scent range, walked to the edge, and curled himself against the mesh. Then he began to purr. Loudly. Constantly. Nimbus stirred. Then, for the first time in hours, he nursed from a syringe. His temperature climbed. His breathing calmed. Kayla stayed the whole night. When Elena arrived just before dawn, she found Ashcroft still curled near the kitten. Neither had moved. The Bobcat's eyes flicked toward her briefly, then returned to Nimbus. Well, she muttered, you're not going to make this easy for us, are you? He was supposed to return to the wild, but something primal in him chose the kitten instead. Red Fern Wildlife Sanctuary followed a strict code. Minimize human contact, no cross-species interference, and above all, never blur the line between domestic and wild. The predator wing was quiet that morning, except for a rhythmic sound, a deep, steady purr. Ashcroft had not moved from the mesh edge where Nimbus's incubator had been placed the night before. His body was still, but his eyes tracked every breath the kitten took. Elena stood silently at the observation window, arms crossed. This is not behavior you expect from a bobcat on the brink of release, she said. No, Henry replied beside her. This is something else entirely. Nimbus, now slightly stronger, remained fragile, his tiny body curling and uncurling, barely aware of the outside world. Kayla Reeves, the young intern, had barely left his side since the night before. Something in her heart told her that this wasn't just about medicine anymore. Margaret Greta Lowell, a legendary wildlife advisor, had been contacted by Elena for consultation. She was due to arrive by the end of the week. Ashcroft refused food. Even when offered his favorite cuts, fresh rabbit, pheasant, he ignored them. When Kayla brought Nimbus closer, the Bobcat's interest returned, but only toward the kitten. Nimbus, in turn, grew weaker each time he was separated. His oxygen levels dipped. His cries resumed. We're not running a fairy tale, Elena reminded the staff during rounds. If this bond is real, it's a complication. If it's not, we're risking emotional anthropomorphism over evidence-based practice. Kayla held her ground. Then measure it. Take vitals. Check cortisol. Prove it's not real. They did. Blood tests from Ashcroft showed something unusual. Elevated stress markers whenever Nimbus was absent. His cortisol levels dropped sharply when the kitten was nearby. Correlation isn't causation, Elena muttered, but she couldn't ignore the consistency. Nimbus was feeding more regularly, sleeping deeper, breathing easier. The staff adjusted their schedules so that during supervised periods, the kitten's incubator was placed near Ashcroft's enclosure. The results were impossible to ignore. Ashcroft would purr, low and steady, whenever Nimbus stirred. When Nimbus cried, the Bobcat's ears would twitch. And when Nimbus fell silent, Ashcroft would finally relax into sleep. It became a quiet ritual, one that both beings depended on. It happened on a gray afternoon, during routine feeding. Kayla had removed Nimbus briefly from the incubator to administer formula. The kitten wriggled more now, stronger, with tiny claws reaching for the bottle. But in one flailing motion, he slipped from her lap and fell to the floor with a startled, pitiful squeak. The room froze. Then, a roar. Ashcroft launched himself against the enclosure wall with such force that the mesh panel groaned under the strain. His golden eyes flared with something primal, not aggression, but panic. He paced, growling low, his body language wild and unsettled. Kayla rushed to pick up Nimbus, who was unharmed but frightened. The moment she lifted him back into the incubator, Ashcroft pressed his body against the mesh again and let out a long, rumbling exhale. Silence returned, but not before every staff member present exchanged a look of disbelief. Later that evening, Elena gathered the team in the meeting room. No one spoke at first. Then Henry said, "I've seen bobcats react to prey." That wasn't it. Kayla nodded. "He's not acting like a predator. He's acting like a parent." Elena opened a file, the one she had created to track anomalies in Ashcroft's behavior. "I'm not saying I accept this yet," she said slowly. "But I agree this is not normal, and not dangerous. What we're seeing may be an instance of cross-species attachment." "It's more than that," Kayla whispered. "He chose him, out of instinct, out of grief, out of something ancient." The next morning, Margaret Greta Lowell arrived. Tall, wiry, with white curls escaping her wool cap, Greta carried an air of knowing that only comes from decades of observing nature's secrets. "I heard you have a bobcat who's rewriting biology," she said with a half-smile. Elena handed her both charts, Ashcroft and Nimbus. "You'll want to see them together," she said. Greta nodded. "Let's go meet the pair." She came to observe a bobcat. What she found was a bond that defied science and demanded a choice. The sanctuary's observation wing was still cold with morning mist when Greta Lowell stood silently before Ashcroft's enclosure. The bobcat lay pressed against the mesh, eyes closed, his broad flank rising and falling in rhythm. A few feet away, Nimbus lay curled in his incubator, tiny paws twitching in a dream. Kayla, Henry, Elena, and Melissa stood nearby, watching. Greta didn't speak for a long time. Then, finally, "How long have they been like this?" "Since the night we put them near each other," Kayla replied. "He hasn't left that spot." "And the kitten?" "Feeding more, growing stronger. Vitals improve when they're together." "It's all logged," said Elena, handing over a clipboard. Greta read the notes quietly. "You didn't break protocol lightly." "No," Elena said. "We're veterinarians, not poets. But here we are." Greta Lowell, a wildlife specialist who had seen everything until now, known for her skeptical approach and rigorous adherence to biological law. Elena Moore, still torn between science and compassion, watching her facility face an ethical paradox. Kayla, the heart of the story's emotional current, young, instinctive, and brave enough to trust what she feels. Ashcroft and Nimbus, still inseparable, though divided by barriers. The bond between them had grown deeper, quiet and wordless, yet undeniable. Ashcroft is physically ready for release. All medical indicators are green. He's strong, healed, alert. The sanctuary has already arranged transport to a protected area deep in the Rockies. But emotionally, he is not the same bobcat that arrived. Meanwhile, Nimbus cannot survive without Ashcroft nearby. And perhaps Ashcroft cannot return to the wild without Nimbus either. Releasing Ashcroft now would mean separation, a trauma no one can predict. Greta interviews the entire team separately. She observes Ashcroft for hours, standing so still it's hard to tell if she's thinking or simply listening. She asks about their history, about what each staff member believes is happening, Instinct doesn't fully explain this, she says finally. We've seen maternal transference across species before, but never in a solitary predator like this, and never this persistent. Elena sighs. So what do we do? Greta pulls a worn leather folder from her bag. You've heard of High Timber Haven, outside Revelstoke? Elena frowns. That's a long-term wildlife sanctuary for non-releasable predators. They specialize in bonded pairs, wolves, coyotes, even a lynx and a deer once. Greta smiles faintly. They have the licensing, the acreage, and they're willing to take them both. The room goes quiet. You're saying, don't release Ashcroft? Henry asks slowly. I'm saying, Greta replies, we don't break what healed them. That evening, Elena sits alone in her office, lights dim, watching the sun disappear behind the ridgeline. 2 folders lay open before her. One is labeled Ashcroft, Release Authorization. The other, Transfer Request, High Timber Haven. Outside, she hears the low rhythmic chuffing of a bobcat's purr. She rises, steps out into the hallway, and walks toward the enclosure. Ashcroft is still there, head resting against the mesh. On the other side, Nimbus is wide awake, looking back. They're not touching, not speaking, but they are connected. When Elena turns to leave, Ashcroft lifts his head and looks at her directly, for the first time since his arrival. The next morning, Elena gathers the team. I've signed the transfer forms, she says simply. We'll coordinate with High Timber Haven over the next 48 hours. Full behavioral observation, constant vet presence during the move. Everyone exhales, some with relief, others with quiet tears. Kayla grips Melissa's arm. They're staying together, she whispers. Elena looks around the room. We didn't plan for this, but maybe it planned for us. Later that day, Kayla kneels beside the incubator, now placed directly beside Ashcroft's enclosure. We're going somewhere new, she tells Nimbus softly, where you can grow, and he can protect you, like he's always wanted. Ashcroft chuffs softly. Nimbus reaches a tiny paw toward the mesh, and for the first time, Ashcroft mirrors the gesture. One massive padded paw pressed gently against the steel. No claws, no fear, only trust. They had survived the odds, but would this new place accept them, not as wild and domestic, but simply as family? The road to High Timber Haven wound through a sea of evergreens and snow-covered hills. Located in the remote forests outside Revelstoke, British Columbia, the sanctuary was unlike any other. It was designed for animals that couldn't return to the wild, but deserved something better than a cage. Ashcroft lay quietly in his transport crate, calm but alert. Nimbus was secured in a separate insulated pod, his soft mewling barely audible over the hum of the sanctuary van. Kayla and Henry rode in the back, watching them closely. It's like he knows we're not taking him to the forest, Henry murmured. Maybe he's okay with that, Kayla whispered, as long as Nimbus is with him. Lisa Danvers, director of High Timber Haven, waited at the gates when the van arrived. A woman in her 60s with firm hands and kind eyes, she had overseen the care of wolves with PTSD and bears that still woke screaming in their sleep. Ashcroft, no longer just a bobcat, now something more than instinct allowed. Nimbus, now 6 weeks old, eyes wide with a quiet confidence no one had seen before. The Red Fern team, Elena, Kayla, Henry, and Melissa, all accompanying the transfer, unwilling to say goodbye until they knew this new home was right. Even with all the paperwork, even with permits and protocols, there was one thing no one could prepare for. Would Ashcroft accept this space? Would he recognize it as home or see it as confinement? The team knew that what they were offering was safety. But what if the Bobcat didn't see it that way? And what about Nimbus? Would he thrive in a world shared with predators, outside the cozy confines of incubators and bottle feedings? Lisa guided them through the sanctuary. Tall fences camouflaged by trees, underground dens, climbing platforms built into boulders, and a system of connected indoor-outdoor enclosures. But the most unique feature was what she called shared domains. "These are for bonded pairs," she explained. "We've had wolf-dog hybrids, a mountain lion who adopted an injured goose. You'd be surprised how often animals rewrite our expectations." The enclosure prepared for Ashcroft and Nimbus was nearly an acre, a natural mix of snow-dusted forest, mossy logs, and a warm, weatherproof cabin with separate zones for wild and domestic needs. The moment of truth came quietly. Lisa opened Ashcroft's transport crate first. The Bobcat stepped out slowly, his paws crunching the fresh snow. He turned in a full circle, nostrils flaring, then walked toward the center of the space. No growl, no resistance. Then, Lisa opened the carrier holding Nimbus. The kitten blinked against the light, then took a tentative step forward. Ashcroft froze. Nimbus gave a soft chirp, and Ashcroft answered, with a low chuff that echoed across the clearing. The Bobcat padded back, gently touched noses with the kitten, then lowered himself to the ground. Nimbus climbed on top of his front legs and curled into the familiar space between his chest and foreleg. Even Lisa looked stunned. That was instant. Over the next few hours, the Red Fern team watched as the pair explored their new home together. Nimbus pounced clumsily on leaves. Ashcroft followed, never more than a few paces behind. When a hawk screeched overhead, Ashcroft instantly stood between Nimbus and the open sky. "I've seen maternal protection before," Melissa said, "but that was pure vigilance." By sunset, both animals lay curled beneath a cedar overhang. Ashcroft licked the kitten's fur with methodical care. Nimbus purred so loudly it could be heard through the observation window. Lisa turned to Elena. "I've never seen anything quite like them." "Neither have we," Elena said, "and I don't think I ever will again." That night, before they left, the Red Fern team gathered at the fence for one last moment. Kayla pressed her palm to the glass. "Goodbye, Ashcroft. Take care of him." Inside, the Bobcat raised his head. Then, with deliberate motion, he pulled Nimbus closer with one paw. And for the first time since arriving at Red Fern, Elena Moore allowed herself to cry. Not from grief, but from peace. They were never meant to meet. But together, they became something unforgettable, and left behind a legacy that reached far beyond the forest. 6 months had passed since Ashcroft and Nimbus found their forever home at High Timber Haven. Spring had begun to loosen winter's grip. Green shoots pushed through old snow, and birdsong returned to the pine canopy. In the heart of the sanctuary, under a curved wooden archway, etched with the words, "Every creature matters," visitors gathered daily to see something that no textbook had ever prepared them for. A full-grown bobcat lounging in a patch of morning sun, while a white domestic cat, now lean and confident, played beside him like a cub that had always belonged there. Ashcroft, now in his prime, had settled into the role of protector, guardian, and, somehow, something like a parent. Nimbus, now 8 months old, had outgrown his kitten fluff, but not his devotion. He still slept curled against Ashcroft's side every night. Lisa Danvers, who had welcomed them, now shared their story with sanctuary visitors, school groups, and wildlife organizations. Kayla, now a full-time staff member at Red Fern, received monthly updates and had kept every photograph. Their story had become a symbol, but not without controversy. Some biologists called it anthropomorphism. Others said the bond was a fluke. A few even questioned the ethics of keeping a wild predator in semi-captivity over emotion. But what none of them could explain were the blood tests, the cortisol patterns, the synchronized behavior, the mutual healing. Nor could they explain the look in Ashcroft's eyes every time Nimbus strayed too far. Lisa responded to criticism in one sentence. Love isn't science, but that doesn't make it less real. The story of Ashcroft and Nimbus spread. An article in the Globe and Mail titled "The Bobcat Who Adopted a Kitten" went viral. Documentarians requested access. Wildlife educators began using their story in classrooms to teach empathy and conservation. Donations to High Timber Haven surged. With the funding, Lisa expanded 2 more shared enclosures for bonded animal pairs, one for a fox and a rescue hen, another for a blind coyote and his sighted canine companion. Meanwhile, Ashcroft and Nimbus remained the sanctuary's quiet heart. Every evening, they performed the same ritual. Nimbus would bat at Ashcroft's tail. Ashcroft would pretend to ignore him, then suddenly leap with a force that sent the kitten tumbling joyfully into a pile of leaves. One morning, a school group came to visit. Among them was a small boy named Leo, who walked with leg braces and rarely spoke. When the group reached Ashcroft's enclosure, Nimbus was resting on a perch just inside the fence. Ashcroft, as always, watched from nearby. Leo wandered to the fence and knelt down. He whispered something. Nimbus stood up, padded over to the edge, and meowed softly. Then Ashcroft rose, stretched, and joined him. The 2 animals sat side by side, gazing at the boy as if they understood something unspoken. Leo touched the glass with trembling fingers. "He's not afraid," he said. It was the first sentence he'd spoken all week. Later that day, Lisa wrote a letter to the Red Fern team. She included a photo, Leo at the fence, smiling. The caption read, "Sometimes healing isn't about the wounds you see." Elena pinned the photo on the sanctuary's message board. Kayla stood silently before it. "That cat saved 2 lives," she said. "Maybe more than 2. Henry nodded. Ashcroft didn't lose his wildness. He just added something to it. Back at High Timber Haven, the sun dipped behind the trees. Shadows stretched across the clearing where Ashcroft lay. Nimbus, now fully grown, nestled beside him. The bobcat blinked slowly, and without a sound, placed his paw over Nimbus's back. Visitors stood in quiet awe, watching from a respectful distance. In the pine-scented air, no explanation was offered. None was needed. Because here, under a canopy of evergreens, a bond once dismissed as impossible had become something deeper. A story, a symbol, a legacy. Of instinct reshaped by love, of wildness made whole by trust, and of a bobcat and a house cat, sharing a home not measured by fences, but by the space between 2 hearts.